Well, good evening, everyone. As I said to some of you before, my name's Cathy Poznik, and I am the chapter coordinator with the Chiari and Syringomyelia Foundation. I live in Cleveland, Ohio, and CSF travels around and does these educational lectures throughout the USA. So what I wanted to do was just tell you a little bit about who CSF is and what we do. I know a lot of you here aren't familiar with the Chiari malformation Syringomyelia. It's a mouthful, even for me still, after 13 years. So I want to tell you a little bit about it. I do have two boys with these conditions, and they have Chiari, Syringomyelia, probably EDS, high pressure, 2 shunts. Been through a lot over 13 years, a lot of ups and downs. So the CSF the mission is to advance knowledge through research and to educate the medical and allied sciences and lay community about Chiari malformation, Syringomyelia, and related disorders. And there's many related disorders. Our core values, I'm not going to read all these. We just, we follow everything to the T. We have a BBB charity accountability seal that we worked hard to get. We are a GuideStar Exchange Gold participant, which just means that we've disclosed everything to the fullest, financials, everything about our organization. And we've also applied for the HAN code. If you're not familiar with that, that's called the Health on the Net. And that means that all of our information on our website is anything medical that would be written by medical and physicians and medical personnel. The interesting thing is we applied a year ago, January, and they told us it's 12 to 18 months before we're going to hear anything. We're still waiting. So end of June, we're hoping to hear that we've got this done. It's a long wait. The organization itself is governed by 3 boards. We have our board of directors. We have our scientific education and advisory board, which is our C board, and our board of trustees. CSF sponsors a lot of events. We do the Bobby Jones Classic. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Bobby Jones, the golfer, but he did have Syringomyelia. In Cleveland, we do a dinner dance for a cure. That's my hometown. We do a Night of Light Children's Gala. Dr. Paolo Bolognese, Dr. Fraser Henderson. There's many doctors involved in that. The charity ball in Staten Island, New York happens every year. A year ago, we were able to honor Heather Andrews, who had passed away from some of these related disorders. CSF sponsors all kinds of research meetings. We have something called our think tank meeting that we just had, and what it is, we get all the physicians in a room. They do not have to be on our board. And they do a lot of discussing about these issues because they are very complicated issues. The whole group of these issues and related disorders are very complicated. You can see we do a lot of meetings, colloquiums. There was the cranial instability colloquium that happened. That's all on our website, I believe, right? We're looking to fund additional research. We are always willing to work with other organizations and groups. We have sponsored 5 research projects, 2 of which have already been published. And our big project for 2014 is the new research project. It's the CSF International Patient Registry. And that was just kicked off at the think tank meeting a few weeks ago. Very exciting stuff. We are setting up chapters across the United States. And what this is it's really to help have a core group in different areas to help with the support and also, to help with support awareness and to help raise funds for these types of programs like this evening and, of course, research. And each chapter strives to maybe do a United Night Walk, hold maybe 3 meetings a year with something like this lecture. And again, if they want to go above and beyond that, they can hold monthly meetings, and we support them. CSF chapters also do third-party fundraisers. We do member fundraisers at Dairy Queen. Those two girls were so sweet. They donated their birthday presents from their Sweet 16 party to CSF. And then we have support group meetings. That was Dr. Oro a couple years ago. We had a big group here. We had a half-day seminar out here. It was registration. There's Dr. Fraser Henderson down there, Dr. Batsdorf talking and being taped. And then we do our United Night Walks, just to tell you real quickly, that we're in our 3rd year of our United Night Walks, and it helps to provide the education and research programs. That's pretty much what we're raising the money for. And last year, here it is right here, we had 2,300 registered walkers. We had 41 walks, and we raised $150,000 in our 2nd year. So we're very excited about that. And this year, we're already over 45 walks. And I'd like to point out and thank Maggie McDonald, who was one of the co-chairs on last year's walk. You can see her up there in the picture. She did a great job. We blew up a lot of gold balloons, which we're not going to be doing this year. Had lots of fun. And there's some pictures from some of our walks. We had the first ever United Night Harlem Shake down in the right-hand corner. We also have solo walks. If you can't make a walk, you can just participate on your own, in your own neighborhood, walk around your block. We have incentive prizes, so we really want y'all to get involved and earn some of this stuff. And this year what we're doing is there's so many related disorders. We're calling it our Black and Gold Strong Walk. We have, these will be given out, and these will go through all the colors of, so the awareness color for Chiari is purple. The awareness color for Syringomyelia is blue. EDS, Ehlers-Danlos, is zebra, like black and white. So this pretty much runs through color. So we're saying bring your colors to the walk, or join us in being Black and Gold Strong to represent all those related disorders. Another big thing that we're doing this year, it's our 1st year, we're going to do a Unite at the Hill. It's going to be our final walk of the year, and we are going to Capitol Hill to meet with representatives, and we are going to have a lecture the night before, and we are going to have a little training session on what you should go in and say to your senators, and then whoever can't make it there, we are going to have local people set up locally with their congressmen, because Congress is not in session, the senators are though. So it's going to be a really cool day, our advocacy day. We have another program that we do that this supports. It's called Consider Chiari, because a lot of it starts with the Chiari and it goes to some of these related disorders. So we are starting with this campaign, and we're just asking doctors and physicians to consider Chiari, and we have some materials for that. We have posters. This was a group of nurses that we gave a presentation to. And you know, we're just, for all you interested in and have a connection to these disorders, consider helping out by joining a chapter or helping out with the United Night Walks. Help us stop the pain. A lot of people suffer terribly with these conditions. So at this point, I wanted to introduce Nancy Nicolay, who I've gotten to know over the past few months. Let me pull his presentation up real quick. So I'm going to bring up Nancy. She is also co-chairing this year's walk, and we've just gotten to know her, and she's going to tell you a little bit about her journey. It's a very interesting story. And then as soon as we get through that, we will have Dr. Guillory come up. Okay, thanks, Nancy.
Well, I have to admit I'm a little nervous up here. I'm not a public speaker, but I figure I'm in a hospital and there's doctors here, so if I faint or fall over, I'm in the right place. So I really have quite a, what used to be, I thought, a discombobulated story. A lot of really strange things going on. As Cathy said, there's a lot of colors involved with the CSF organization and the things that they support, Chiari, Syringomyelia, and related disorders. So I could be wearing a few colors tonight, and I'll tell you a little bit about my story and how my colors came to be. I guess I should start is close to the beginning of symptoms that I can recall. when I was very, very young, I had all of my baby teeth capped because I had enamel problems. My mother used to harp on me and say, you know, take care of your teeth. You know, we've spent a fortune on them to try and save them. Little did I know that was really kind of another symptom of some of these related problems. Up through my teenage years, I really, you know, was pretty normal. Really uneventful, other than, you know, a few earaches. I had growing pains. I had a bad bout with the flu. But that's pretty much all I can remember. I was a really good student. Most years I had perfect attendance. I was really not so much into sports. I remember really not enjoying PE when we had to do the gymnastics, because I didn't like being upside down and spinning around and turning around and, or being up too high. I also remember a lot of just walking, and my ankles would kind of roll as I walked. Then as I got a little older, then more things started cropping up, like irritable bowel syndrome. I had really, really tight shoulders and neck, and then I had jaw locking episodes. I just kind of chalked that all up to having a stressful job and sitting at a computer or a typewriter way back then, and doing those kinds of things. Then I had a really bad case of tonsillitis, irregular and painful menstrual cycles, and then I had a really bad sprain, misjudging a curb. So, I mean, not really, I wouldn't think, out of the ordinary types of things. As the years went on, I had several miscarriages. I had chronic sinusitis, I had GERD, and I had hearing loss. I had cracked teeth, I had some crowns, a root canal, gum recession. I always felt kind of dizzy and nauseous. I would go to the mall and just, you know, I don't know if it was the lights or what, but I spent less money, I guess, that way. But my family found it funny that I would get kind of dizzy and sick feeling just doing funny things like trying to put lights around the Christmas tree, just going around like that. So they'd make fun of me about that. I would have, I couldn't do carnival rides, and we called it the whirl and puke. And anyway, so really nothing that out of the ordinary. Well, things kind of really got very interesting after that. It all really kind of began with some tendon-related ankle problems, just from walking, doing exercise like normal people do. And so tendon-related issues, did a lot of conservative therapy trying to calm down the tendon, wearing walking boots and specially made custom lace-up boots, walking casts, that sort of thing. Ended up with a DVT. Then I had an MRI showing, after all of this conservative stuff, the tendon was actually worse. So a few days before my first ankle surgery, I tripped and fell on the sidewalk, landing on my arm and shoulder. Went through the first surgery for the ankle. 6 months later, I had the other side of the ankle, another tendon-related problem. So another surgery, and they did a lengthening of the Achilles tendon. As I was rehabbing from that, I misstepped and injured my other ankle. I tore the deep deltoid ligament or tendon or whatever it was, and had a high ankle sprain. So I was told that that's kind of a hard thing to do without actually breaking something. Then I started having shoulder problems, which I figured was being on crutches from the 2 ankle surgeries. It just really became unbearable, and I had constant muscle spasms, was doing PT and everything I could. I was just miserable. After about 1.5 years, I was diagnosed with snapping scapula. And what I heard from that was, we see this typically in professional baseball pitchers in their 20s. Well, I'm a sedentary middle-aged woman, so anyway, so I had another surgery for my shoulder, and they removed the bursa under the scapula, all the dense adhesions that were sticking there, and then they removed the tip of my scapula. 5 days after that surgery, I had emergency surgery for flexor tenosynovitis in my ring finger, totally unrelated to the surgery I had 5 days earlier. Again, more shoulder issues popped up. I had pressure in my chest wall. I began to have pressure in my face. I had weird dystonia type jerking things with my jaw in my neck. I had a buzzing sensation in my chest. It felt like I was plugged into an electrical socket. It didn't hurt, but just buzzing. I had a strange jerking of my legs when I was laying down, and just this weird feeling of a pulling of my eye. So still more symptoms, which led to more tests, injections, MRIs, CTs, EEGs, EKGs, blood tests, all negative. Somewhere in the middle of all of this, I finally had a doctor that sent me to be evaluated for a connective tissue disorder. After more tests, they said, you've got joint hypermobility syndrome, most likely Ehlers-Danlos. Ehlers-Danlos is a disorder that affects the connective tissue in your body, and you just have bad glue, bad collagen, and collagen is everywhere. So that really started making a lot of sense to me about all of this stuff that was going on. Then I had my dog and I collided and he broke my nose. After about a month later, then I started having numbness in my face, a weird feeling in my tongue. I started having dizziness and vertigo, feeling that my head and my stomach weren't in sync, brain fog, and all kinds of weird neurological things. I had my first brain scan. They ruled out MS. They thought I had a brain tumor, and that ended up being an artifact on the scan. So more tests for rheumatoid arthritis, autoimmune, myasthenia gravis, paraneoplastic syndromes, all of these negative. The shoulder and the chest issues just continued, and I was miserable. Added to the mix, I started having random shooting pains down my arm and into my hand. I was evaluated for TOS, thoracic outlet syndrome. After a confirmed EMG for brachial plexus entrapment and neurogenic TOS, I had positive responses to pec minor blocks and scalene blocks. I underwent a resection of my first rib. They released my pec minor, released my scalene, removed a fibrous congenital band. And then I also had, following that surgery at the same time, my the CMC joint removed because of pain. So it was also discovered that I had dysregulated breathing, and I had episodes of sleep apnea, and also my oxygen levels were going down too low, and so I'm actually on oxygen at night, which has helped a lot with my my energy levels. So I still have nerve entrapment issues and ongoing fatigue in my right arm. Then the year following my TOS surgery, I had hip surgery for an FAI impingement and a labral tear. So they went in and reshaped my femur bone, and my labrum was reconstructed with an allograft. I still had the facial numbness, the dizziness, more pressure in my head, shoulder, neck pain, weakness in the legs, feeling at times that I was just gonna like croak, keel over. The pain and pressure was just constant, and I was miserable. I was trying everything to find relief. I was doing acupuncture, manual therapy, pulling on my hair, pulling on my ear, all kinds of stuff to relieve this pressure. I had episodes of just kind of sitting and staring and just brain fog and just kind of just feeling, just totally disconnected. It was just relentless. Just 6 months ago, I was finally diagnosed with cranial cervical instability, herniated cerebral tonsils, and occult tethered cord. So a month later, my husband and I flew to New York, and I had 2 major surgeries a week apart. The first being for occult tethered cord, meaning they can't see it on an MRI, but they know it's there, and it was tugging on my spinal cord. So I had that surgery, and it was amazing, the difference I felt. The pressure in my face, a lot of that was gone. I had a huge difference in the way my legs felt and my bowel and bladder. Huge differences there. A week after that, I had a cranial cervical fusion where my skull was repositioned on my cervical spine and fused to my top 2 vertebrae. I also had a decompression of my skull to make more room for my brain, and it was incredible, the amazing relief that I got. So for the past 5 months, I've been wearing a hard cervical collar, and as I heal, just this week I started PT to kind of work to wean myself out of the collar, so working on a range of motion, so we're still really good buddies right now, but I'm ready to have a ceremony for that. But this has been an amazing journey. I have been to so many doctors. I have spent so much time, so much money, so many hours in search of relief and answers. I don't make this stuff up. I tell my husband that all the time. I don't make this stuff up. I have never been crazy. I have never been a malingerer. I have never needed attention. I just needed answers. You know, some people find it really strange that I can talk like a medical professional, but when you have to become your own advocate to really find out what's going on, you really do. And I really have to thank CSF because the information and the education that they provide on their website has been incredible. It has been a huge resource for me to be able to learn about some of these conditions that I have and really know that I've been validated by doctors when we finally find answers. It's been amazing, and I just want to say how grateful I am to CSF for providing these wonderful resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. You have quite a story, and thank you for sharing with all of us. Dr. Oro is he is the director of neurosurgery at the Center of Colorado and the director of the Chiari Care Center, and he is also a member of our C board at CSF. So we're very grateful to Dr. Oro for all he does for us.
Thank you, Cathy, and welcome. Welcome to our hospital and our community if you're from another community. It's my real pleasure to introduce Dr. Gerard Guillory to you. He's a wonderful physician and a good friend. I think as you already know, or you'll see in your write-up, he's a native of St. Charles, Louisiana. Went to the Louisiana State University School of Medicine, internal medicine. However, that next paragraph talks about integrative internal medicine. And internal medicine is an advanced medical specialty, but it's also more focused on management of disease. A lot of wonderful things are done by internal medicine physicians. And internal medicine physicians do preventive care, but integrative takes it to the next level. The idea is let's make prevention even wider. Let's look at a variety of factors that can affect our quality of life. We not only need someone to treat us when we're ill, we want someone that can help us avoid being ill. And so he's a real resource to this community. He's a specialist in particular. He's knowledgeable in a lot of areas, but he's a specialist in the gut itself. And we are realizing, as he'll go into detail, that it's an area that we insult ourselves a lot. Okay? We don't want to get insulted through the skin. We don't want a splinter. We don't want any kind of injury. We don't want to get insulted through the lungs. We don't want to catch a virus or a bacteria. But we can constantly insult, some of us do, to a certain degree because we're not taught, we're not knowledgeable. But we insult ourselves through the gut a lot. So it's I'm glad you had this wonderful quote up here from Hippocrates, but when you think of cancer, diabetes, obesity, connective tissue disorders, again, he's going to explain it much better than I can. the gut. So it's my real pleasure to introduce Dr. Guillory. Thank you.
I think we're lucky to have one of the world's leading authorities on Chiari malformation in the area. We do a lot of work together, a lot of shared patients, and a lot of times the Chiari patients that we work with Dr. Oro on come to us, and the first thing I tell them is there's a tendency to blame everything that you have on the Chiari malformation, and my job is to make sure there's not something else that's causing your symptoms, and not just blame it on the Chiari malformation. And I love this quote from Hippocrates. I'd like for everybody just to say it once.
All disease begins in the gut.
Just remember that. If you get nothing else out of this today, remember that. And he said that about 2,000 years ago, and if doctors will embrace this concept today, they can still become early adopters compared to their colleagues. If we can have the next slide. So here's a real case presentation. This is what I call a holistic patient. Do you know what a holistic patient is? It's a patient that comes in with a whole list of problems. And this is actually a real patient. She knew I had an interest in irritable bowel syndrome, but actually came to me with palpitations. And as it turns out, the palpitations started around the same time that she was started on Mirapex, which is a drug to treat restless leg syndrome, which was one of her many complaints. So my rule number one, and I try and tell all the students, is every patient complaint is a drug side effect until proven otherwise. And when I listen to you talk about your tendon problems, the quinolone antibiotics can cause diffuse tendon EDS type symptoms. She had fibromyalgia where you hurt all over and you're tired. She had migraine headaches and anxiety and insomnia and restless legs and so forth. So we stopped the Mirapex. That made the palpitations go away. We checked her iron level and it was really low, and we're going to talk more about that later, and that was the basis for her restless leg syndrome. And her iron was low because she was on acid blocking medications to treat her heartburn, and as it turns out, the heartburn was really on the basis of gluten sensitivity. So when we peel back the layers of the onion, at the end of the day, we got her off all her medications and all of her symptoms were gone. You can't talk about leaky gut syndrome without talking about gluten sensitivity. It's like talking about World War II and not making Hitler the main nemesis in that whole discussion. Gluten's the main nemesis as relates to leaky gut syndrome. So if we can have the next slide. So this is a book that I wrote in 2001, third edition of a second book. I wrote the first book for patients with irritable bowel syndrome in 1989. And I'm not bragging, I'm just telling you, I've been studying gut physiology and gut health for 29 years now. And I do believe with Hippocrates that all diseases begin in the gut. And when we get further into the discussion, I think you'll understand how it can relate to Chiari malformation and Syringomyelia and some of these other conditions where you're probably just getting gut inflammation that's causing systemic inflammation in the brain. And now the cerebrospinal fluid that's supposed to be percolating along nicely is getting choked off at various areas, and that's probably what's causing the increased pressure. So this is Dr. Michael Camilleri, who is from the Mayo Clinic. So I've known Dr. Camilleri for years. We were in Rome together back in '97 when the Rome criteria were developed for diagnosis of irritable bowel syndrome. And so pathophysiology means what's causing irritable bowel syndrome. So if we can go to the next slide. And this next slide's kind of busy, but there's just one thing I want you to pay attention to. Increased permeability, mucosal inflammation. That's leaky gut. Now, you know, conventional doctors consider leaky gut kind of a quack diagnosis that naturopaths and functional medicine practitioners have put forth for probably 15 years now. But what I'm glad to see is it's becoming mainstream now. They're just calling it hyperpermeability or increased mucosal permeability syndrome. And he's got gluten with a question mark. I'd definitely take the question mark off. Bile acid excess. But anyway, I just wanted to show you that here you've got mainstream medicine embracing this concept of leaky gut. They're just calling it something that sounds more scientific. It would be like saying you have tennis elbow, and nobody buys into that, but we call it lateral epicondylitis, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So if we can have the next slide. So this is leaky gut possible associations. If you go through the literature and you look at all these different things, you know, my rule of thumb is every potential problem that you have could be related to a leaky gut and gluten sensitivity, since the two go hand in hand. But look at cognitive impairment, all this ADHD and autism, increase in autoimmune and inflammatory disorders. I mean, as a nation, we're becoming sicker, and there is a prediction now that this generation of kids will not live as long as their parents for the first time ever. And that's despite the fact we've made all these advances in medicine. And so we've got one more slide. So IBS obviously is on the list. Peripheral neuropathy, the neuroinflammation, I think that's where the connection comes back to the gut inflammation causing inflammation potentially in the brain, and things like Chiari malformation and idiopathic intracranial hypertension. So if we can have, and the other thing I'll just point out, you get a lot of nutritional deficiencies when you have a leaky gut. Think of it this way. Think of your digestive tract. So you've got this small intestine that's about 26 feet long, and it is the surface area of a tennis court if you were to stretch it out. And it's one cell layer thick. So think of your body as a plant, and the little villi, which provide the absorptive area in the small intestine, are like the roots of that plant. When you have leaky gut, you just don't have a root system. The whole root system's been destroyed in severe cases. And if you don't have, you're not digesting your food right, you don't have the right probiotics, you're not extracting the nutrients, then you end up with all these nutritional deficiencies, which, as you'll soon see, can cause, in turn, neurotransmitter imbalances in the brain, mood disorders, and you will think you're going crazy. So I just threw this in, leaky gut neurological disorders. This is from PubMed. There were 162 original articles associating gluten sensitivity with neurological problems. So gut inflammation causes brain inflammation, and if you haven't seen Dr. Perlmutter's new book that just came out a few months ago, Grain Brain, it's probably worth reading. I've heard Dr. Perlmutter speak. The guy's brilliant. He is board certified in neurology and nutrition. Again, the easiest way to think about it is just damage to your root system, but your lining of your small intestine is one cell layer thick, and your nutrients are absorbed across the cell, and your food particles are absorbed between the cells, between what we call tight junctions that under normal circumstances are closed. And you have a new protein molecule that was described in 2000 called zonulin that regulates the permeability of these tight junctions. Now, when I was in medical school a long time ago, we were taught that the small intestine is like this barrier and things are absorbed across the cells. We didn't really understand the absorption of larger food particles between the cells. And zonulin, if we can see the next slide. So zonulin, the discovery of zonulin has really legitimized leaky gut. And boy, the drug companies get all excited when you find some molecule that they might be able to find an anti-molecule, right, to treat it. Think of zonulin as like a garage door opener. So you hit your garage door opener, you drive your car in, you close the garage door. If you have an overexpression of zonulin, then your garage door stays open, and now all the leaves blow in and the burglars get in, and that's not such a good thing. Gluten causes an overexpression of zonulin in all humans, and so that's why gluten is always a factor. So we're going to spend a little more time talking about, getting in more detail into gluten sensitivity. It's not the only thing that can cause a leaky gut, but it's always a contributing factor. So what are the things that cause leaky gut? What are the things that damage the lining of the intestine, that cause disruption between the tight junctions? So you've got medications like ibuprofen. So you've got fibromyalgia because you've got leaky gut from something else, so you start popping all this ibuprofen, now you're just fanning the flames. You've got food reactions, gluten, dairy, eggs would be the most common. You've got pathogenic microorganisms, and we'll talk more about that. So if you've been on a lot of antibiotics for a recurrent sinus infection, and now you've got yeast overgrowth, and that's contributing to the leaky gut. Excess bile acids, which is more of an issue if you've had your gallbladder taken out. We already mentioned the overexpression of zonulin as a reaction to gluten. And then the biggie we'll spend more time on is the genetically modified organisms, or the GMOs. So we've had a 400% increase in autoimmune disorders in the last 20 to 30 years. 400% increase. If we had a 400% increase in cancer or heart disease, everybody'd be all up in arms trying to figure out what the heck's going on. And nobody seems to be paying much attention to this. And when we talk about autoimmune disorders, that's where your body makes antibodies against native tissue. So Hashimoto's thyroiditis, most common cause of an underactive thyroid, is an autoimmune condition. Psoriasis, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, all autoimmune conditions. And patients that we've addressed their gut with all these autoimmune disorders, we've treated at last count 400 patients in the last 15 months, and we've had 2 that were non-responders with a whole variety of things that related back to the gut. What I tell patients is if we're going to do a medical makeover on you, we need to fix your gut first and then see what shakes out. So you hear a lot about gluten sensitivity. I read something the other day, 13% of professional athletes are gluten-free now. They're predicting in 10 years that 30% of the population is going to be gluten zero, 30% is going to be gluten light, and 30% is going to be business as usual. So a group of gluten experts met in Oslo in 2012 to try and develop some nomenclature so everybody's on the same page when they're trying to describe what are called gluten-related disorders. That's the umbrella catch-all for any of the different ways that you might react to gluten. So celiac disease would be one. Celiac disease, when I was in medical school, I never expected to see a case. We were taught it was rare, 1 in 3,000 people. It presented in pediatrics, and I knew I wasn't going to do pediatrics. I never expected to see a celiac patient and skipped all those lectures. But we know now that celiac disease can develop at any time in your life, and we'll talk about the trilogy of things that needs to happen for you to manifest with celiac disease. And then the big conundrum is this non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So with celiac disease, we can draw your blood and say you have antibodies to transglutaminase, and that defines celiac disease. So we have a biomarker, our blood test that tells you have celiac disease. The non-celiac gluten-sensitive patients, that's a different mechanism. You react to gluten, but there's no established biomarker. Well, let's just say there's no established blood test by the mainstream medical community to say you're a non-celiac gluten-sensitive patient. And the only way to really know that is to go off gluten on a trial basis and see how you feel. And so we have, if you go in my office, if your patients see all the books on, paleo diets and avoiding gluten and whatnot. In my experience, and the estimates of non-celiac gluten sensitivity are 6 to 7%. Nobody knows. I'll tell you my experience in coaching people to get off gluten for the last 25 years, particularly the IBS patients, it's 100% of patients feel better when they go off of it. And we have students in the office, and I have them keep track. You tell me how many patients that have gone off gluten that we're seeing for follow-up that are better, and it's 100%. So let's talk a little bit more about celiac disease. That's one of the gluten-related disorders that's gone up. Coincident with the increase in autoimmune diseases, it's gone up 400%. So 25% of the population carries the gene for celiac disease. So we can do a test and tell you have the 2 genes that predispose you to celiac disease. Having the gene is not the same as saying you have celiac disease. I mean, you could have the gene for breast cancer. We all have a deck of cards we're dealt, and that's our genetic makeup, which might predispose you to one disease versus another. It's like saying you have the gene for breast cancer. It doesn't mean you have breast cancer. So 25% of the population has the gene. That likely has not changed in the last 30 years. Probably if you look back, and they can prove that in blood that they've found or saved from people going through the VA system, the gene's always been there. You don't get a genetic shift of this magnitude in a 20 to 30 year period. But now 1% of the population has celiac disease as defined by the transglutaminase antibody. 95% of those patients go undiagnosed. And you're seeing now Channel 9 Health Fair is offering celiac disease testing as an optional test. The problem is patients have that test and they go, well, I guess I'm fine. There's 2 problems. One, you could still have the gene and be pre-celiac, and then you could get celiac at some other time. I'm here to tell you you should just avoid gluten, period. So again, we talked about the 400% increase. So here's what's a little bit new and different in terms of why does one person get celiac and another person doesn't when you have the gene? So the first thing you've got to have is you've got to have the gene. The second thing is you've got to be exposed to gluten. So if you eat a rice Asian diet and never have gluten, you're not going to get celiac disease. And we always kind of knew that, the genetic predisposition, the environmental trigger, and that's true for celiac, and that's true for a lot of other diseases. But the third thing is this increased intestinal permeability. Something happens to cause inflammation in your small intestine, to damage your root system, and now larger gluten protein molecules get into the bloodstream and the gene is turned on, and now you've got celiac disease. Does that make sense? So that's the new thing, this increased mucosal permeability, which is another way of saying leaky gut. Something causes leaky gut, and then you get activation of the celiac gene. When you get activation of the celiac gene, now you're really in a downward spiral. So Dr. Fasano actually is the one that discovered zonulin. So he's like one of the leading celiac gluten researchers in the world. And if you just pay attention to the bolded part at the bottom, that when you sort of address autoimmune disorders, if you reestablish normal intestinal barrier function, in other words, you get the root system working again, you can get rid of the autoimmune disorder. I mean, how much money are we spending? We had a medical assistant who was part-time this summer who had bad psoriasis. He's getting Enbrel, which is about $5,000 a month. And we got him off gluten, and within 2 or 3 weeks, his psoriasis was all gone. We had a medical student this past month who had terrible hives, been in joint aches and pains and IBS, and been to the rheumatologists and the allergists and everyone else, and treating her leaky gut, and her symptoms are almost completely gone. So this is huge. I mean, it gets me kind of, I get upset about the 400% increase of autoimmune diseases if nobody else does. So here's another kind of concept that might explain this increase in autoimmune disorders. And this is called molecular mimicry. And what happens is if you notice these sequences of amino acids, so you put together amino acids and you get various proteins. And if you're reacting to gluten, then you may react to normal tissue in the body like the thyroid, where you have sequences of amino acids that mimic the sequences in gluten where you're making antibodies against it. So this is another way that you can get autoimmunity, and we're going to talk more about all the different ways you can react to foods. So this is Dr. Fasano, and I like this quote. If you're suffering with symptoms and nobody has an explanation, so if you've got a headache, let's make sure you don't have a brain tumor, but at some point when you've excluded all the known causes for whatever your symptoms are, try going gluten-free. And you'll still have people that will counter this argument and go, oh, gluten-free, we need healthy whole grains. And I say bull. So this is what we tell patients. And I'll tell patients, I want you to go gluten-free for a while. And I had one the other day, and she had this real sad look on her face. And I said, you're going to feel deprived if you give up gluten. And she said, yep. And I said, well, you have a choice. Do you want to be deprived of gluten, or do you want to be deprived of your health? And you make the decision. Let's talk a little bit about GMOs, which a lot of people feel is a major factor causing this epidemic. So GMOs in and of themselves can contribute to leaky gut. So there's basically two types of genetically modified organisms out there. One is the Roundup Ready corn. So they have genetically engineered, so that means they take this gene from some other species and they put it into the corn, and they make the corn resistant to Roundup, which is glyphosate, and then they could just soak the corn with the glyphosate and the corn does okay and all the weeds die. And they even spray it, and there's a technique where they spray it right before they're going to harvest, let's say the peas or the corn, to kill the leaves of the corn for the ones that aren't genetically modified to be Roundup resistant. So that's glyphosate. But glyphosate's an antimicrobial. It also is a chelator of minerals and probably contributes to vitamin and mineral deficiencies. So you've got this non-organic soil that's depleted of minerals anyway, and then you're going to put glyphosate on it, which chelates or binds up the minerals. So now you're manganese deficient. You need manganese to create serotonin, which is an important neurotransmitter for mood. So that's why we're seeing this increase in all the use of antidepressants like Prozac, for example. I mean, why is everybody so depressed? 20 years ago, everybody didn't seem to be so depressed. The Bt toxin, so now they take the corn and they genetically modify it so that the corn, every cell in the corn is making a pesticide called Bt toxin. And Bt toxin kills the insects and the worms by punching holes in the intestinal tract of the insects. So guess what that does for your intestinal tract, right? So now you're getting these GMOs that are causing increased mucosal permeability. Now you've got the third part of the triad because you had the gene and you're eating gluten, and now you're eating GMOs, and now you get sick because you've lost your root system. So you might ask, our government's looking out for us, right? I mean, how did this ever happen? Well, the current Deputy Director of Food Safety for the FDA is the former VP of Policy for Monsanto, who holds the license for all of these genetically modified. So what do you do? I mean, there's going to be a ballot initiative in Colorado, and all it asks is if it's got genetically modified organisms, it needs to say that on the label. And if you see that or want to become part of that, I've never been a big political activist, but I'm all over this one because we're killing people, and nobody seems to be paying attention. So the way to get around it is if you see this label, then that means that company has gone through a process, independent process to verify there's no GMOs. And if you get something that's organic, there's not going to be any GMOs. And they're the main GMO products. Corn and soy lead the list. Canola's way up there. Cotton. I mean, there's even some suggestion cotton in your clothing, that toxin can get into your skin that way. So we've decided you've got a root system that's not working like it should. You've got leaky gut. So how do we fix you? Well, the first thing is we've got to remove anything that is contributing to the leaky gut. And we mentioned the causes earlier. So we want to get rid of any medications that might be contributing to the leaky gut, like ibuprofen. The second thing would be to get rid of any pathogenic microorganisms. We'll talk more about that. And then the third thing is to look at your diet and see if there's any foods that might be contributing to the inflammation in the gut. The second thing is we want to replace any nutritional deficiencies, correct any neurotransmitter imbalances, and correct any hormone imbalances. The third thing is we need to re-inoculate the gut with probiotics. And then the fourth thing is we want to give you some supplements to actually repair the leaky gut. So we're going to talk about the first R, which is removing offending foods. And I love this quote. It's people are fed by the food industry, which pays no attention to health, and are treated by the health industry, which pays no attention to food. I want to talk just a minute about food intolerances and food sensitivities because people get a little bit confused. There's a lot of different mechanisms whereby you can react to a food. So one mechanism would be an enzyme deficiency. So lactose intolerance, you don't have enough of the enzyme lactase. You can't break down lactose, which is a complex carbohydrate in dairy, and then it goes undigested into the colon where you get gas, bloating, and abdominal pain. There's another enzyme deficiency called diamine oxidase, which is a factor. Sometimes you can get pancreatic enzyme deficiencies. So enzyme deficiencies. The second one would be a direct irritant effect. So if you drink orange juice and have heartburn by nature of the acidity in the orange juice, then that can make your heartburn worse. Even the water that you drink, and we'll talk more about that, can be acidic and cause problems. And we had another student in the office who was drinking water that was acidic and had some problems with gastritis. You can have some additives like MSG and aspartame can cause more of a pharmacologic effect. So think drug side effect. You can have the whole range of immune-mediated reactions. So you've got celiac, which is an autoimmune disorder. You can have IgG antibody reactions, IgE antibody reactions, cytokine-mediated. I'm not meaning to confuse you. I'm just telling you it's not as simple as saying, well, I did this one allergy test, and that's going to give you all the answers that you need. And then a lot of times the increased mucosal permeability can cause secondary food intolerances, and when you fix the gut, the other allergies kind of go away. And then gluten, because of its overexpression of zonulin, causes a problem in everyone. So here's another case study. So here's a patient who came in with weight gain, high blood pressure, fatigue, and irritable bowel symptoms. So we're going to kind of take her through the whole leaky gut process of removing and replacing and re-inoculating and repairing. And so you might wonder, why does she have high blood pressure? Well, remember what I said, you can get magnesium deficiency from leaky gut, and if you're low in magnesium, which about 40% of the population is, then that can cause high blood pressure. And so anyway, this is a food allergy test on her. She's kind of reacting to everything. Now, there's more than this one page, but I'm just using this to illustrate a point. And when you light up like a Christmas tree on a food allergy test like that, generally, you've got your root system's going, you've got a pretty significant leaky gut because you're getting these larger particles into the bloodstream that shouldn't be there. So your proteins are made up of these constituent amino acids, and it should be just the amino acid, if it's properly digested, that gets absorbed. If you're getting sequences of amino acids, then your immune system gets activated and you get secondary food reactions. So we have a follow-up. And you can see how everything's kind of quieted down quite a bit once her gut was fixed after she had follow-up testing. We did a study in 1994 to see if MSG was a trigger for irritable bowel syndrome. So we fed patients a meal with and without MSG. And MSG, for those of you that aren't aware, is the flavor enhancer that was discovered by the Chinese. It's a popular food additive. It goes by a lot of different names. It's in a lot of prepackaged processed foods. And I include monosodium glutamate and aspartame, which is NutraSweet, together because they do the same thing. So let me explain. MSG is the sodium salt of glutamic acid. Aspartame contains aspartic acid. Glutamic acid and aspartic acid both stimulate the same receptor in the brain called the NMDA or N-methyl D-aspartate receptor. Chronic overstimulation of that receptor can cause neurodegenerative problems. In fact, there's a drug called Namenda that blocks the NMDA receptor that's used to treat Alzheimer's. Now, we had a patient 2 weeks ago that came in our office, second visit, works for RTD, and his eyes started welling up and he started crying in the second visit. And, what's going on? He goes, I just want you to know that you changed my life. And he listened to one of the audio CDs, 10 Steps to Better Health, that we left up there. And I talk about MSG and aspartame and why you should avoid it and why it causes neurodegenerative disorders. And he, in an attempt to lose weight, had started drinking 5 to 6 diet sodas a day, was doing all this low-fat salad dressing, which is full of MSG. He said, it got to the point that I couldn't get through the first chapter of a book, and I love to read. And he goes, after listening to your CD 5 or 6 times in that section and cleaning my diet up, he goes, I've read 2 books since the last time I was in here. If you go to our website and our YouTube channel, he just did a video testimonium. It's very compelling, but sometimes it's something that simple, a food additive that could be making you sick, which doesn't have anything directly to do with leaky gut, but what happens is not everybody is as sensitive to MSG. Some people react more violently than others, but if you have increased mucosal permeability and you ingest MSG, you're more likely to get a big load of it in your system than if you've got a healthy intestinal tract. So that's really kind of the connection. So let's talk a little bit about water. This is from a little Channel 7 story that we did. If you remember your pH scale, green is neutral, and that's what you want to be. Your blood pH is about 7.4, and that's 7. So we're going to take some pH drops and put 3 drops in each one of these glasses. So this is soda, 2 of the popular distilled waters, Arrowhead, which is mineral water, water from the tap, and water from our alkalinizer at home. And you get a lot of people say that this is all a bunch of bull, but talk to the patients that we've helped by changing their water, and it makes a big difference. So if we can see the next slide. So you can see that these waters actually have a pH of about 4.3. Now, when we did this story, the VP of marketing for Coca-Cola, who makes one of the popular water brands, wrote back and said, even if our water is acidic, orange juice is acidic and it's good for you. And I wrote back and said, no, because people with heartburn and gastritis, we tell them to avoid orange juice. And by the way, come clean, tell us what the pH of your water is. Of course, we never got a response to that. So if you don't want to do food allergy testing, which we do IgG testing, and that's another thing. If you go online and Google IgG testing, you'll see a lot of the mainstream allergists that do IgE testing dismiss this as worthless, and it's not scientific, evidence-based medicine, which is kind of the mantra, really, of the drug companies when you think about it. It's evidence-based medicine, and it's kind of like you've been in practice 29 years, and all of a sudden your experience is worthless. You know, I can say that, well, you know, this works, and I've been doing this for 29 years, but that doesn't mean anything because nobody spent $30 million to do a study. So what I tell patients, and try this for at least 1 week, go on, are you familiar with the paleo diet? So it's basically no grains, and the notion is that when we introduce grains into our agricultural society 10,000 years ago, now Homo sapiens have been around about 200,000 years, so the 10,000 years that we've had grains was relatively recent, and that was good because it created civilization. We didn't have to become nomadic hunter-gatherers. You could go grow your grains and then you could live right there. And, so this is no grains, dairy, egg, soy, and a lot of the soy is genetically modified. No legumes. So what can you eat on a paleo diet? It's basically vegetables and whole fruit and lean sources of quality protein and good fats. So a typical breakfast, you know, might be a shake for a lot of people because that's easy to do. Breakfast is the tough one because the traditional breakfast foods, muffins and pancakes and cereal and toast, are really high in carbs. So you have to kind of think outside of the cereal box and maybe do some soup for breakfast, or, you know, eat some leftover chicken or whatever. But chicken or protein paired with veggies would be basically a paleo diet. If I was going to do one book as sort of a contemporary guide to how I think we should be eating, it would be this book. And there are tons of them out there, but it's well written. The first 100 pages gives you kind of the science. And we've got some handouts up there, and this book is mentioned. And try it for a week and see how you feel. Fortunately, your small intestine can recover pretty quickly. I mean, your small intestinal lining cells are the fastest growing cells in the body. Every 3 days you get new cells. And I'm not saying if you've been sick for a really long time that you'll be better in 3 days, but you can recover pretty quickly. So we talked about pathogenic microorganisms and how they might be a contributing factor as relates to leaky gut. And there is a test, a stool test that you can do to sort of get at that. And this is a test based on DNA technology, so the same technology that would put the criminal at the scene of the crime. In this case, we're looking for criminals in your intestinal tract. So here's a patient actual stool test, and this patient had Helicobacter pylori, which most people think of in relationship to ulcers in the stomach and gastritis, which it's known to cause that. But it also is a player with regards to leaky gut. I had 2 patients last year that had chronic hives, one for 17 years, one for 20 years. And if you Google H. pylori and hives, there's an association. We got rid of their H. pylori, hives gone after 17 years and 20 years. And this patient also had yeast. So just think of it this way. When you've got leaky gut, you've got damage to the root system. It's usually not one thing. It's usually a combination of things. So here's the follow-up stool test. On this patient, you can see the H. pylori is gone naturally, and the yeast is all gone. And we can talk about, at the end, how we kind of did that. So remember, we're on the first R, which is remove. Remove anything that's contributing to the leaky gut. Remove anything that's damaging your root system. Here are some other kind of miscellaneous things that can contribute to leaky gut. Chemotherapy agents, alcohol, antibiotics can... We see this all the time where somebody's on a long course of antibiotics for a sinus infection or bladder infection, and that kills the good bacteria in the gut. You get yeast overgrowth, and it tips the balance away from the good bacteria that we need. So the next thing is replace, and we do some testing to look and see, what you might be deficient in, and then we try and fix that. So if you've got leaky gut, that can cause problems with your adrenal glands, thyroid glands. We mentioned the nutritional deficiencies, and then you end up getting neurotransmitter imbalances and mood disorders from the nutritional deficiencies. So I want to talk about ferritin, which is the storage form of iron, as one example of how you can get mood disorders. So iron is a cofactor for the production of the neurotransmitter dopamine. So you take the amino acid tyrosine and you convert it to dopamine. If you don't have iron, you can't make that conversion efficiently, and you end up with the dopamine deficiency syndrome. So here's tyrosine, and there's iron as a cofactor, and it's converted to dopamine. And dopamine's the feel-good neurotransmitter. And on the next slide, we'll see here are a partial list of symptoms of dopamine deficiency. You remember our first patient who had the restless leg syndrome, her ferritin level was in the tank. But ADHD, apathy and depression, you crave uppers. People who are dopamine deficient are more likely to have addictive personalities. You put on weight easily. And that's a very partial list. As I said, dopamine's your feel-good neurotransmitter. And you can actually do urine testing looking at neurotransmitters, which I think everybody should have done before you ever go on a psychotropic drug. I mean, there's natural ways to raise your serotonin and to raise your dopamine and correct these imbalances. So the fourth R is to re-inoculate. And we're going to spend a minute just talking about probiotics. I could spend an hour just talking about probiotics. We've been recommending probiotics for 15 years, and now it seems very popular, sort of like the gluten avoidance. So what is a probiotic? Probiotics are the good bacteria that we all need for normal digestion. And the easiest way to understand how probiotics work is to think about how yogurt's made. So if you want to make yogurt, you take milk, you add probiotics like Lactobacillus acidophilus, and then you incubate or slow cook the milk for a couple days at 90-something degrees, and you end up with yogurt. If you took that same milk and you left it out at 90-something degrees without the benefit of the good bacteria, what would you end up with? Sour milk, right? So a lot of the people with digestive problems are making all this sour milk. You've got to have those probiotics. Having the good bacteria in your gut is as essential to normal digestion as essential as anything else. Pancreatic enzymes, your liver, anything else. If you don't have the right bacteria in there, forget it. You're not going to digest your food appropriately. You're going to make sour milk instead of yogurt. And it also helps to keep the pathogenic microorganisms in check, keeps the yeast at bay. So the fourth R is to repair. And there are different things that you can do to help the gut repair itself. It would be like if you had a skin rash and you put some salve on there to try and help speed up the healing of the skin. So glutamine's been around for a long time, probiotics. Prebiotics are the food that the probiotics need that help to sustain them, aloe, omega-3s for everybody, omega-7s. But the real key in the last 15 months that we've added to what we do for leaky gut patients is this immunoglobulin complex. So the immunoglobulins are antibodies, and these are immunoglobulins that are derived from the placenta of beef cattle, as opposed to colostrum, which are immunoglobulins derived from the colostrum or first day breast milk of dairy cattle. They do the same thing at the end of the day, and so immunoglobulins are antibodies. When you get a vaccine, you make antibodies against influenza, so if you're exposed to influenza, you don't get infected, right? And when mom's breastfeeding, she's giving all these antibodies through the colostrum or breast milk to the newborn infant, and that's how you protect the newborn infant. So it's the same kind of concept as colostrum. I just, from an ethical standpoint, would rather use placenta-derived immunoglobulins than depriving the baby calf of mom's breast milk for the first day. I'm not sure what happens to those baby calves, but at the end of the day, you end up doing the same thing. And this is how you can explain getting rid of the yeast and getting rid of the H. pylori in the patients that we've treated using the protocol. And so the protocol's immunoglobulins and probiotics and glutamine and all this other stuff. I didn't come up with it. It was actually a naturopath that I heard speak in Orlando a little over a year ago. And we've had pretty good luck with it. So you can go to the last slide and then you just shut it off. So we'll open it up for questions. No.
Okay. And
But it has some other issues, liver problems, but it doesn't directly inflame or damage the small intestine.
like ibuprofen.
Right.
And glutamine, is that a precursor to glutathione? Because I started taking budgets of glutathione, and it seems to be.
So the question is glutamine a precursor to glutathione? And glutathione is the most potent anti-inflammatory that our bodies have or create. And glutathione is made from 2 or 3 different amino acids. I think cystine's one of them. I don't think glutamine is one of them, but I'm not sure.
How does all this relate to cancer and osteoporosis?
It relates to all of it. So when you think about it, you've got gut inflammation causing systemic inflammation. In other words, inflammation throughout the body, joint aches and pains, brain inflammation. Anytime you have inflammation, you have increased cell turnover, and anytime you have increased cell turnover, your body's in a continual state of repair, your immune system's activated. So if you have colitis, inflammation of the colon, you're more likely to get colon cancer. If you've got prostatitis, you're more likely to get prostate cancer. So definitely, root system's destroyed, all this stuff seeping into the body, immune system's activated, inflammation throughout the body, definitely that's going to increase your chances of getting cancer.
So what are omega-7s?
So what are omega-7s? Omega-7s are another class of omega fatty acids. And omega-7s, the most common source is sea buckthorn, which is a berry. And omega-7s are really good for skin and mucosa. So that's why we throw it up there for leaky gut.
Thinking about the water slide you showed and how it went from red to dark blue, seemed like. And is green what you're looking for? And if so, where do you find it? It didn't seem like you had a pH balanced example up there.
Yes, so the question is on the water slide, and you want a balanced pH of, let's say, 7, how do you get that? And if you remember, the tap water was actually green.
Oh.
So what I tell people is get a simple filter to get the chlorine and bacteria and stuff out, or whatever other contaminants you've got in the water. So just filter your tap water, and it will have a pH that's 7.
Like a Brita? Is that?
Yeah, that would probably be adequate.
So, just kind of give you an example. I don't have thyroid anymore, and I don't have the gallbladder anymore. For somebody like me, how would that affect me going on to help me since I don't have those things?
So the question is, I don't have a thyroid, I don't have a gallbladder, and what kind of... Now, I can't give any specific advice to anybody, but there's a condition called bile acid malabsorption where you make too much bile acid. Bile acid's made in the liver, stored in the gallbladder. When the gallbladder contracts, it ejects the bile acid, and that helps for the absorption of fat. Excess bile acid can cause or predispose you to gallstones. Then you take out the gallbladder, and now the bile acid's going directly into the small intestine. And a lot of those patients will complain of cramps, urgency, and diarrhea immediately after they eat. And in that particular case, there is a specific, actually a medication that binds the excess bile acid. So what we do is we kind of put people through the leaky gut program, if you will. So go on this paleo diet if you don't do the allergy testing anymore. I'm just saying try this paleo diet and see how you feel. And then let's try you on these different supplements to re-inoculate and repair, and then we replace any deficiencies. And then we see how you're doing. And in almost every case, patients are better. But then if you were to come back and go, you know what, I'm not 100% better, I go, well, you had your gallbladder removed. We probably need to mop up that extra bile acid. Or like the patient we saw the other day who was much better, but she said, you know, I still get bloated when I eat. And she had an aversion to protein. Well, that's a key to me that that person doesn't have enough digestive enzymes and needs some extra hydrochloric acid in the form of betaine. So once you kind of run it through the filter the first time, it's kind of easy to start to figure out. I had another patient last month who had migraine headaches and IBS, and she came in, she was about 70% better, but was still having migraines. And she was getting Botox injections for her migraines, that's how bad they were. And when we looked at the supplement she was taking, her vitamin D was in corn oil, and she knew from testing that she was allergic to corn, so just switching her out to a vitamin D that had olive oil, non-GMO, from the corn oil, and then her headaches were gone completely. I call that putting the bow on the package.
Another question I have is,
So the question is, if someone's allergic to nuts and allergic to vegetables, what do you do? And I'll just tell you that reactions to vegetables are pretty rare, and it's the protein in most things that you react to, and vegetables aren't that high in protein. So we don't see reactions to vegetables. Yeah, we don't see it very often, but a lot of times it could be fix the gut and you're not reacting to these vegetables. And it would be a case of wanting to know, you know, how did they determine that he was reacting to these vegetables? What kind of testing did they do? Good questions. Anybody else?
I asked before, but what's the relationship between this and osteoporosis?
what's the relationship between leaky gut and osteoporosis? It has to do with the fact that you can't absorb, you're not getting adequate amounts of calcium and magnesium. It's the nutritional deficiencies, particularly the nutrients that you need to support healthy bones.
Do you think this is raising the rates of dementia?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there, that like this one patient I was telling you about, the MSG and aspartame, I mean, this guy had 1 foot in the, you know, right. Well, you guys have been a great audience. Thank you so much.